Hello and welcome. I'm Jesse McQuarters, editor of Stat Brand Studio, and I'm honored to moderate today's conversation exploring the vision behind the Dr. Stephen A. Harrison Patient Advocacy Fellowship Program. It's an initiative designed to elevate the role of the patient advocate in MASH and liver disease research, drug and diagnostic development, and policy discussions. The fellowship provides financial support, education, and access to key scientific and policy forums where these advocates can gain the skills and confidence to contribute meaningfully to shaping the future of liver disease care. I'm joined by three distinguished guests. Wayne Eskridge is founder and CEO of the Fatty Liver Foundation. Dr. Becky Taub is founder and senior scientific and medical advisor at Madrigal Pharmaceuticals. And Dr. Maru Rinella is professor of medicine at the University of Chicago and director of the Metabolic and Fatty Liver Disease Program. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Harrison. He had an extraordinary impact on the field of MASH, and his sudden passing last year was a huge loss, not just for the clinical community, but for patients as well. Could each of you just speak a little bit to his influence, personally and or professionally? And Maru, I'll start with you.
Stephen was really an incredibly passionate, knowledgeable, and effective leader, I would say. He had boundless energy. He was unshakable with respect to his attitude, was just always positive. He was the face of MASH therapeutic landscape and really had a hand, I would say, in the development of almost all major trials. And he became almost an indispensable person to interact with on a pharma basis. And I would say on a personal level, he was, of course, a very close friend of mine for about 25 years, but he always made time for me. He was always a very busy person. But I would just as an example of how wonderful and kind he was. When I was sick with COVID early in the pandemic, he had food delivered to my house every single day for 10 days until I was recovered. And so he was a sweet man.
And Wayne, tell me from your perspective, because clinician partners are essential in the work that you do. It seems like Dr. Harrison was really special.
Stephen was the doctor that we all hope that we can get for our personal physician. He was amazing as a human being, really. I'm fortunate to be able to call Stephen a friend because, and I suppose I'm one of legions because Stephen had so many friends, but beyond his skill as a clinician and his ability to deal with patients, he was the shining light in the liver disease research area. He set an example that very few will be able to match in the field of liver care and patient support.
Becky, I know you work closely with Dr. Harrison. Tell me a little bit about that work together and his personality a little bit.
I was the chief medical officer at Madrigal, and Dr. Harrison worked with us right from the very start of our phase 2 program. So the first study of resmetirom in MASH patients. He was the principal investigator of our trial, and he had been working on research in MASH really since 2006. There a seminal paper in New England Journal of Medicine. He was a true leader. He understood the patients. And as soon as we were in a position to be able to conduct a phase 2 trial, I contacted him. And that's what set off right from the get-go a wonderful relationship with him. And he was with us every step of the way throughout the development of resmetirom, engaging with the regulators, making sure that the trial was conducted properly. And his role was vital in the development of the first treatment for MASH.
Let's go into a little more detail on that patient voice in MASH clinical research. Taking Dr. Harrison as an example, he was really at the center of a broad, I guess you could call it a renaissance period in clinical research for MASH and, some of this drug and diagnostic development that continues through today. So in that spirit, in his honor, tell me a little bit about what role can the patient and advocacy community play in building on this momentum? And Wayne, I'll kick it to you first.
The role of the patient has evolved tremendously over the last 2 or 3 decades. The challenge that we face is the huge gulf of knowledge between a patient who is very familiar with what it is to be unwell and the information that the trialists have to deal with, the environment of drug development is so complex today that there has been, although there's a recognition of the values that patients can play, the gap between patients that are in a position to really help the trialist is a limited number of people. There's a dearth of education for patients who want to be advocates to understand regulatory science and the kinds of challenges that the trial designers and the implementers face. And so it's one of the real problems we have right now. We have the theory, we have the goal, we have the recognition. The execution is still lacking.
Wayne, tell me a little bit about what a well-designed trial with patient input looks like. How do you know that that's working, and what are the outcomes that we're really shooting for in incorporating the patient voice into trials?
If you don't get a design that the patients will accept or the patients will feel good about, or ones that don't make them feel disengaged, if you don't design your system in a way that the patients will feel recognized and supported as they go through the trial, you're going to have not only issues with retention of patients, but your information, the data that you ultimately get out is not necessarily going to answer the question as to whether or not the drug is really working. Being able to balance those competing needs of the patient community that you will be serving in the trial community and the information that you have to get to have a successful drug, marrying that together is really the goal.
All right, Becky, if you could talk a little bit about the role of patient advocates. What role can they play in shaping disease education and some of these real-world treatment pathways?
So this is a great question, and one that we have been learning about a lot in the last year since resmetirom was approved for the treatment of patients with MASH and non-cirrhotic MASH with moderate to advanced liver fibrosis. It's amazing how little is known by physicians, certainly, about patients who have what we refer to as fatty liver disease, and oftentimes are informing these patients that, oh, you have a little fat in your liver, there's nothing to be concerned about. And in fact, the diagnostic tests have not been that good in the past. They're improving greatly. And so patients are going through long periods of time where they didn't even know they had progressive liver disease, and it would get advanced to a really progressed stage before they would find out. And so what we've learned is that in the real world, which is outside the clinical trial, this is really the predominant situation right now. And we've seen how the patients and advocates who are the most familiar, they can really contribute to the education, informing the patients that they might have a serious liver disease with liver scarring and how to get help, and helping them to learn about what is available to them. So if we can expand the number of patients who can carry that message, it'll be a vital message both to potential physicians and prescribers as well as to the patients who have this disease.
And Maru, we talked about that Renaissance period. We talked about advancing diagnostics, which are moving in a much less invasive direction. Can you give us some detail on that and how these advocates can play a role in advancing some of these non-invasive endpoints?
We do really want patients to be involved in trials, and we want to move away from biopsy-based endpoints because of many reasons, including the fact that they are costly, painful, are associated with complications, et cetera, but they're also extremely imperfect as a reference standard. So what we've been trying to do thus far is using as a benchmark on which to judge the accuracy of non-invasive tests on something that's really imperfect and a moving target in a sense. So we need to move away from that, and we need to take that leap and connect it right to patient-related outcomes, which is what we all care about, and it's actually what the regulators ultimately care about. So I think in order to really achieve that objective, in addition to participating in trial design, I really think that patients and patient advocacy organizations need to lobby. I think that's really where we're going to start to move the needle.
Absolutely. And I certainly see this regulatory piece. There's also kind of the patient advocacy and education piece. I'd imagine that empowering these advocates can really help in that too.
Absolutely.
We've all seen that the accuracy and the effectiveness of these non-invasive tests has just grown dramatically in the last decade. And when we tried to do clinical trials in MASH a decade ago, when we were first starting to have a regulatory path toward approval, really the liver biopsy was, even though imperfect, was a lot more accurate than these tests. And what we've seen is that there's been a huge amount of work by people like Dr. Rinella and Dr. Harrison and a number of others, as well as our patients getting involved with these tests, that have now opened the door to using less invasive testing to diagnose and follow the progression or regression or improvement of MASH and liver fibrosis.
It sounds like the value in patient advocacy, driving clinical research, and care pathways is really, really clear. So I want to talk about some of the specific barriers, I know we've touched on them a little bit, that we need to address if we want patients more involved in designing trials, writing guidelines, and shaping regulatory standards for new medications. So Wayne, can you kick us off there?
Well, that's really the crux of the matter at this point, is that we all agree that this would be valuable, but how do we execute? What are our needs? How do we solve these problems? And what we find as we communicate with the patient community is that people will engage with the desire to be an advocate. They feel the need to make a difference, and they want to contribute. And there aren't a lot of ways for them to learn, to get good information. So as we thought about this problem of willingness, a desire on the part of advocates to be effective, to make a difference, one of the big gaps was just simply the lack of knowledge, and how do they get good counsel on best practices, on what the environment that they need to think about really is like, the processes that lead to success, how to understand the relationship between the patient community and the research community, and how we might educate people about what's really involved in clinical trials and why they should do it, and all of the results that we want to get depend upon good sources of information. So just addressing those issues, those kinds of issues, is what the Harrison Project is about, because this was a passion of his, and part of our desire to recognize him was to recognize his commitment to the patient advocate community and the goal on his part to make a difference in the way patients interacted with medical systems.
Maru, do you see that complexity, and is it easy to find patients that are able to operate in these scientific, industry, academic environments?
I would say it's not easy. I would say that in my experience trying to engage patients and patient advocacy organizations, and just in the Delphi process we did to change the nomenclature, it was difficult. It was difficult because patients are a very varied group of people. I mean, they're just like anybody else. And it's hard to really talk about them as a totality, really, because they're all individuals. And so how do we best reach out to those people and join us and help us? And I think for me, The base of the problem is the lack of awareness that we've kind of brought up a little bit. We really see the tip of the iceberg of the disease burden of this disease. I would suspect that we've got about 5% of people diagnosed with significant fibrosis. That is a major, major problem. And so, again, arming patients, patient advocates with knowledge about the disease itself will be critical to sound the alarm to increase disease awareness. That is super important, not just so that we identify more people and bring them to therapy, but also increase awareness about the importance of participating in clinical trials. That is really critical. And in fact, even if, say, they are randomized to placebo, even people in the placebo groups do quite well. And a lot of that has to do with that close relationship that you have with the patient. When you're in a study, you get seen a lot more, et cetera. So I think there are many facets to how patients and patient advocacy organizations can really, really help move the disease forward.
All right. And Becky, just want to give you a chance to weigh in from an industry perspective. Obviously, we've talked about how those interactions with patients are so critical to designing trials and executing. Do you see any other challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Wayne's comments explained it very, very well. And Maru, the fact that a patient participating in a trial, what they have to go through to participate in the trial, how you can really enhance their participation by making sure you think about their needs. Mm-hmm. Don't have them come for a visit and then wait for 3 hours. I mean, there's a lot that you can hear and learn from patients. And that is one of the reasons for moving away from these invasive tests. I mean, that's not a good feeling for patients to have to go through that type of test that has morbidity associated with it. So really think about how you're caring for the patient and what their experience is, because very few of us really understand that. I think when we conduct a trial, we're too distant from it. So having patients who can communicate is super helpful.
Yep.
We talked a little bit about the Dr. Stephen A. Harrison Patient Advocacy Fellowship Program. Really addresses a lot of these points and really is seeking to move the field of liver research forward. Wayne, can you tell me a little bit about your goals for this first year as the fellowship program launches and some of the things you're thinking about?
Sure. The Fatty Liver Foundation, we've been working in this area of patient advocacy for a long time, but we were particularly impacted, I think, by the passing of Stephen. It was such a tremendous loss to us as a society and as a patient group. He was such a shining star in development of treatments and care of patients. And so as we thought about our goals of how do we create or how do we support and encourage better patient advocacy, the opportunity, I suppose, is sadly the opportunity presented itself to honor Stephen in a very real way that was supportive of his approach to his profession and his patient care. So we created the Harrison Fellowship with the goal of we will recruit up to 20 passionate people that have a goal of making a difference and wanting to contribute particularly in the area of better clinical trials and better communication with the patient community. And we will help provide education to them, the information that they need to be able to communicate confidently with the professionals in the industry. One of the problems we have as patients is that we know ourselves, but we can be intimidated by these very smart, highly qualified people. And so we want to build people's confidence in being able to communicate in those kinds of settings and to have the information that they need. So those 20 people then will be our first year class, if you will. But the goal is to continue to build the core of knowledgeable people that industry and government and various interested organizations can look to for rational advice from a patient community. So it's part of just building the skill set in the patient community for the more technical aspects of the industry.
And what, to your mind, does an ideal candidate look like? Certainly patients, but they're surrounded by a whole ecosystem of caregivers and people that could also very well advocate for them.
There's not a formula, really. People come to this situation from every conceivable direction, but people tend ultimately to get motivated to participate because of an experience either personally or someone close to them. So there is some event in their life which has caused them to care about this issue. And at that point, they say, well, what can I do? How can I matter? If they have the goal of that, they probably have a decent connection to enough of a science background to be able to engage with the issues that we deal with when we start to talk about medicine. But from there, it's really people that care and want to make a difference and are willing to invest time and energy to become more knowledgeable about it.
Maru, as you hear Wayne talk about this, can you just explain why this fellowship program is really kind of a fitting tribute to Dr. Harrison and what you really hope the patient advocates will do to continue his legacy?
Yeah, no, thank you. I do want to just add one comment to what Wayne was saying, because it really made me think that we sometimes don't do the best job at making sure patients are aware that there are trials available. But what we really aren't good about, and I'd love to see us incorporate more of, is just offering to all patients who we see that there are opportunities for them to be involved in shaping our field. And if they're interested, to reach out and giving them information to do that, because I don't think we do that enough. And I bet you if we did that more, we would see more involvement. But that's sort of an aside. I think this is particularly fitting because Stephen was actually one of the earliest proponents of non-invasive identification of patients. And a lot of this was in the context of selecting, the right patients, people who would benefit from, say, a treatment intervention. But he really never lost sight of what the overarching goal is, which is just to improve patient outcomes, really quite simply. And again, I think if we can continue to move us in that direction, we will get to where he would have liked us to be, which is moving away from biopsy-based endpoints and make that leap to non-invasive tests.
All right. And as we wrap things up, Becky, I know support is absolutely essential to, first of all, creating this program and then also continuing it year after year after year and building and growing. Why was it a good fit for Madrigal?
We have always put patients first. And patients, as you've heard, were really at the heart of what Dr. Harrison stood for. So supporting this fellowship is our way of honoring Stephen's impact on the entire MASH field, recognizing MASH and bringing novel MASH therapies to patients. He was a true visionary, and it was a privilege for me to work alongside as a partner with Dr. Harrison throughout the resmetirom development journey. And we're proud to support this fellowship as a way to carry forward his extraordinary commitment to patient science and the future of liver health, while empowering patient advocates to carry his vision forward.
Truly a wonderful legacy and much more news, much more progress to come. So really appreciate the time, really appreciate the three of you telling me more about Dr. Harrison, the fellowship program. Wayne, if people want to learn more about eligibility and applying, program details, what's the website to go to?
Sure, it's simple. It's harrisonfellows.org.
I'm Jesse McQuarters, editor of Step Brand Studio, and thank you to Wayne Eskridge, Maru, Rinella, Becky, Taub for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.